Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul, and I'm just going to talk about risk management in regards to forests, and especially talking about forest fires, and just looking at the overall response time, looking at different things to kind of mitigate losses in Canada. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about firefighting, especially in the area of forest fires, and also talking about how the difference between when we get in urbanized areas, close to urbanized areas, as well as looking at deep forests that are not against urbanized areas in terms of response time. This is a little bit about myself. I'm a CPA CGA by trade, but I really focus on solutions and highlighting what we need to do is move forward as a country. My agenda, I'll talk a bit about mutual aid. I'll talk a little bit about forest fires, especially fighting them across the country in terms of how provinces respond to support each other, and I'll talk a little bit about the military and how it responds to natural disasters. So if there is a fire event, and I'm using Fort McMurray right now because it's the one that's in the news right now, and it should be for the right reasons because of the depth of what's happened out there and the tragedy. I'm not going to highlight that because it is very sad, but I just want to show you kind of how fires can come at a city or an area, and how fire departments with the limited resources have to do certain things in terms of their tactics, in terms of their response time. So this particular map is showing you where the fire came in at multiple fronts. Fort McMurray in Wood Buffalo jurisdiction has roughly about 130 firefighters, and most of them are volunteer firefighters, but there is a good chunk of their department that's full-time, so they're a composite force, and they have probably about 5 fire halls in the greater Fort McMurray city area, and then they've got some outside outlying areas where they've had other fire departments or stations. So when they get the first call in when they're starting to see residential fires, they likely respond, but the magnitude of a fire like this that happened in Fort McMurray that was coming from multiple fronts, they would have tried to deploy their equipment where they could have done the most protection and help. And that's something that people don't understand, that when you have resources in a fire coming at multiple fronts, fire departments have to respond in a certain way they can protect things the most, benefit. So when the call came in, typically they would have responded, and they would have probably called all their firemen in, and then beyond that what they would have did is they would have reached out to mutual aid, and I'll get into more specifics about what mutual aid, as well as would have contacted the province in terms of a complete force response in terms of forest fire fighting too as well, and that all would have been done within a certain period of time as part of managing the whole fire thing in terms of the command control center. So basically how fire departments respond in general, and just in terms of firefighting, it's a triage system. They basically look at the magnitude of that fire, and the response is based on that magnitude of fire, and that's what you're seeing here as well. Mutual aid is basically a way where fire departments that don't have the same capacity can bring in additional resources to fight fires. This has been going on for a while, so in order for equipment to come in, it has to be requested from that jurisdiction, and it has to be coordinated. So if you line up your equipment and you're trying to be nice to come into a jurisdiction, if they're not ready to accept you to deploy you, sometimes what happens is it might stop right there. So there has to be a coordination of effort in terms of basically pulling equipment in terms of how they're going to manage that, and that's where mutual aid comes in. Forest fire management. Now, this Interdepartmental Agency was created to kind of share resources as part of mitigating this natural disaster when they came to forest fires. So what happens is when a province is going through a significant pressure point, like Saskatchewan did a few years ago and Alberta is doing now, they can go into this interdepartmental agency and request more resources. So depending on the fire alert in those provinces, they can redeploy resources, fire bombers and firefighters, to go out west to support other provinces that are struggling with fighting fires. And that's what this interdepartmental agency is. It's an agency where provinces can make the request. Now it's really critical in terms of assessing the situation and moving quickly to get assets moved out to fight fires, because the quicker you get out there, the more chance you have to get some control of that fire. So it's very critical by the actions of a province to ask for that request sooner than later. What does the Canadian Forces do? We're not really designed to fight forest fires, but they are designed to help for natural disasters. So a province can make a request to the Prime Minister, and then he can execute the strategy in terms of deploying the Canadian Forces. Now, a lot of cases they'll use their helicopters and personnel to maybe do some public safety work, maybe help prepare landing strips, do other things to support the infrastructure required in this particular case to fight the fire. And that's something that's discussed all the time, but it's again another area that maybe there's some improvement that could be done in terms of how we respond, how quickly we can mobilize people, because we do have army bases across the country that may be closer point to those position of fire or position of natural disaster that could be mobilized within 12 to 24 hours, and that's something they probably should consider as they move forward. So what do we do at issues at hand here? Again, I'm about solutions. Many provinces have made cuts to the forest management budgets. Again, they're under fiscal restraints. What they likely have to do is review those budget cuts now and read the position of how they're going to basically properly manage their forestry, from control burns to kind of look at how they basically manage their forestry, because forestry is a critical sector to the economy. It brings in exports from softwood lumber to wood going out to create furniture and all that, so it's a critical driver. So we need to protect that asset from future losses and mitigate that, because if we lose a lot of the forestry, we're losing a lot of product for export, and that's something we need to mitigate. The other thing that we probably need to do, we probably need to relook at building codes from industrial to residential property, how close they are to woods. Maybe we need to relook at how deep they are in the woods and see if we can put more safety nets around that in terms of fire break zones, that there's some protection around that to mitigate some of those losses. That's something to probably consider. Evacuations, that's something that cities and municipalities, First Nations need to prepare for in terms of flooding or anything else. Can we immobilize? Can we move those people quickly? And what's required to do that? We should be testing that strategy on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're prepared for any natural disaster. Lessons learned. Maybe we could learn some stuff from California, how they fight grass fires. Maybe we can learn from other areas where they fought major forest fires to see if there's ways to mitigate things in terms of our response time and what can be done to mitigate future losses from happening. Response times. This is an age-old problem that's been going on for many, many years. How do you respond time in terms of command control centers, in terms of positioning firefighters, in terms of bringing mutual aid in? Maybe there's some lessons to learn in terms of a fire of the magnitude of what's hit in Fort McMurray, how we bring resources together and control that, and how we bring things and mobilize assets. Fire breaks and fire control come back to more forestry management policies, and that's what I discussed earlier, how we basically do that. Water bombing and retardant, remember, you're dropping it from a high rate down. It will do some damage, but it won't stop it. Really what you need most cases when you're fighting fires in a forest, you need rain. But there might be ways to better water bomb, or techniques that can better utilize, and in terms of the resources to try to break things down a little bit better. But again, a lot of cases you're dependent on wind, so there might not be a lot you can do in those areas, but there might be something you can consider as part of managing forest fires. So this presentation is not about looking and blaming any level of government. It's looking about solutions as a coordinated effort. When we start dealing with natural disaster, whether they're forest fires or floods, how do we respond quicker? How do we look at ways to mitigate some of those losses by looking at new policies or changing existing policies to better work and protect assets? Because that's really what we're talking about here, and that's critical as a country as we move forward. It's not about the rhetoric, it's about basically solutions, and that's what we need to push our politicians from municipal to provincial and federally to basically look at solutions, and that's really what I'm trying to drive here with this presentation. Thank you.